On June 16, 1775, on the heels of the battles of Lexington and Concord that kicked off the Revolutionary War, American troops learned that the British were planning to send troops from Boston to occupy the hills surrounding the city. Some 1,000 colonial militiamen built earthen fortifications on top of Breed's Hill, overlooking Boston and located on the Charleston Peninsula. On the morning of June 17, 1775, British plans were set in motion. General Howe, leading his troops from this spot, going up that hill, would attack the Americans that had fortified Breed's Hill. That monument is the monument to the Battle of Bunker Hill, which the battle becomes known as. So it is from this spot that the British attack began. The Americans had fortified the high ground. Why the high ground? Much harder for an enemy to come up a hill and attack a fortified position. The British wanted to make a statement here. They wanted to send their finest troops against what they felt were just local militia, not real soldiers at the top of that hill. But when they got to this spot and the Americans opened fire, they started taking massive casualties. The British plan didn't really work out the way they wanted to. Eventually, they will push the Americans off that hill, but they're going to take massive casualties. On June 17th, some 2,200 British forces under the command of Major General William Howe and Brigadier General Robert Pigot landed on the Charleston Peninsula, then marched to Breed's Hill. As the British Army advanced in columns against the Americans, Prescott, in an effort to conserve the Americans' limited supply of ammunition, reportedly told his men, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." When the redcoats were within several dozen yards, the Americans let loose with a lethal barrage of musket fire, throwing the British into retreat. After reforming their lines, the British attacked again, with much the same result. Prescott's men were now low on ammunition, though when the redcoats went up the hill for a third time, they reached the redoubts and engaged the Americans in hand-to-hand combat. The outnumbered Americans were forced to retreat. However, by the end of the engagement, the casualties of the Battle of Bunker Hill were high. 50 years after the battle, the Marquis de Lafayette set the cornerstone of what would become a lasting monument and tribute to the memory of the Battle of Bunker Hill. The project was ambitious. Construct a 221-foot-tall obelisk built entirely from quarried granite. It took over 17 years to complete, but it still stands to this day atop a prominence of the battlefield now known as Breed's Hill. Marking the site where provincial forces constructed an earthen fort or redoubt prior to the battle, this site remains the focal point of the battle's memory.
So I'm at the statue of William Prescott, and he is advising his militia soldiers to be careful with their ammunition and be patient before they fire upon the British who are coming up the hill. And he's most famous for the saying, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." So that's essentially how close you had to be before you had to fire your musket for it to be effective. And these are troops that are fighting the British for the first time, and they're going to be nervous, but they're going to have good leadership and be able to fight off at least twice the British assault on Bunker Hill.
Taking their feet, putting them in a right angle. Fire! You'll see one of the muskets did not go off. Militiamen, again, not being the most reliable troops. Shoulder, fire lines. Come on, man. Whoa. Uniformed troops would be all doing this together by the same motion. Muskets would be even. But you'll see these are militia troops. They're inconsistent. Hey, ready. Bring that. Fire! Once again, you'll see some of the muskets not going off. That can be due to a number of different...
By the end of the engagement, Patriot gunfire had cut down some 1,000 enemy soldiers, with more than 200 killed and more than 800 wounded. More than 100 Americans perished, while more than 300 were wounded. Despite this loss, this battle goes down as a heroic stand by American forces, despite being arrayed against a very powerful enemy, the British Army. The ground I'm walking on is actually the ground that the American forces occupied in June of 1775. Now this is called Breed's Hill. We call it the Battle of Bunker Hill because the hill that was called Bunker Hill was a little bit more famous at the time. The Americans actually occupied this hill, which is called Breed's Hill. Now, when the battle takes place, the Americans knew that the high ground would be a better position, and you can see all around me the high ground. Now the British are going to come up this hill twice. The Americans will beat them back. And on the third charge, the Americans are going to run out of ammunition, and the British will break through. They will bayonet. They will kill many Americans on this hill. But for those charges, at least the first two, the Americans stood fast. And even though this was a defeat for the American forces, it really helped the Americans feel much better about themselves. They had beaten back at least 2 attacks from the finest army the world has ever seen to that time. And it happened on this spot. And you can see here the hill that the British were coming up. And if you were here on June 17, 1775, it would be a sight that you would never forget. One of the great heroes of the battle was Dr. Joseph Warren. Warren had been commissioned a major general in the colony's militia shortly before the battle. Rather than exercising his rank, Warren chose to serve in the battle as a private soldier and was killed in combat. His death, immortalized in John Trumbull's painting, The Death of General Warren at the Battle of Bunker's Hill, galvanized the rebel forces. He has been memorialized in the naming of many towns, counties, streets, and other locations in the United States by statues and in numerous other ways.